Hello, welcome to Graphic Policy Radio. This is a podcast at the intersection of genre, media, and movements for social change. I'm your host, Ilana Levin, and this is a podcast for folks who know that Andor is about as good as it gets. But we're still going to enjoy a little bit of Star Wars animation as a treat. And we are back to talking Star Wars again, a thing that Graphic Policy Radio has been known to do on occasion. I love animation, and I was really excited to check out the new, I guess it's not super new anymore, but the Darth Maul animated streaming series over on Disney. And when I watched it, I knew I would have to have back on the podcast one of my favorite Star Wars experts, Professor Holly Schaeffer-Raymond. She's a writer and professor at Temple University. She's the author of Maul is Lost, 2018, Heaven's Wish to Destroy All Minds, Maul is Lost, M-A-U-L, Maul is Lost, 2023, and Cuckoo Island, 2024, and featured in the Lambda nominated We Want It All, an anthology of radical trans Poetic. You can find her comics writing at Shelf Dust and Comics XF. Listen to her on previous Graphic Policy Radio episodes of Star Wars animated series. Is this something we like to do together?
I think so.
Yeah, this is just like our thing. We talk about Bad Batch, and we talk about the Star Wars. And of course, this is actually how I met her, is through the Cerebro podcast, where she was the guest to cover Jamie Braddock episode, the Astra episode, and the Firestar episode. Just always a delight to talk to. Welcome back to the show, Holly.
Hi, good to be here.
So I want to start this off with a quick spoiler-free top-line review for people about who the show is for, who might enjoy it. So that way, if there are listeners who haven't watched it yet, they can decide if they want to watch it or not. And then after we finish the spoiler-free bit, we're going to go full spoilers, every old thing. This show has lots of things that could be spoiled. So really, folks, do keep this in mind. So let's start off with the spoiler-free top-of-the-line thing. For me, my feeling is, if you're somebody who loved Andor because Andor is the best thing ever, this is not Andor. But if you enjoy Star Wars animation, this is a really solid Star Wars animation. And there are a lot of people who enjoy Star Wars animation. And the quality of the visual aspects, the matte paintings, the artistry, the voice acting, the action sequences is all very top-notch. So if you're into Star Wars animation, you should definitely watch this series. What's your top-line thought about who this is for, Holly?
Yeah, I don't think this would really thrive as someone's first Star Wars cartoon.
Yeah.
It is pretty deep into the weeds. If you are just familiar with the movies, you might reasonably be asking, why is this cat alive? The show kind of presumes that you know why he's running around with most of the people that he's running around with. It's kind of building on stakes that previous kind of animated installments have set up. It's definitely a piece of the broader Dave Filoni puzzle. And I actually found myself curious how coherent and how entertaining it would be to someone totally fresh to that milieu.
Yeah.
That being said, I want to second you here. I thought this was visually gorgeous. I think we both talked in the past about how 3D animation in particular can sometimes feel a little cold.
Mm-hmm.
I thought this show had such a gorgeous kind of painterly look to it. That kind of felt like it's continuing to hone and refine this aesthetic that they've been working on for, 21 years at this point, I guess.
Oh my God. Yeah, that's true. I mean, technology has gotten better as part of it. The early Star Wars animation looked like ass. The 3D animation, let me be specific, looked like ass, which is why I never watched it. It looked like the world's ugliest polygons, and I don't usually like 3D animation. I only really began watching Star Wars animation because my friends sold me on Rebels being this really leftist kids show, which it absolutely is. And once I'd gotten over my distaste for 3D animation and enough to watch that, I was so in love with the world building that Filoni was doing. I said, fuck it, I'm going to go watch some ugly ass 3D animation from even before this. And it did. And that is how I was ready to watch this series. And I don't have the encyclopedic Star Wars knowledge that you have. And that's one of the reasons why I'm really glad to have you on. Like, I'm watching this and I'm saying, I don't know who the fuck Rook Cast is, but it also doesn't really matter. Like, yeah, I think if you're not invested in what is up with Darth Maul. Broadly speaking, you might not be ready for this, but if you, like me, are like, I don't know who the fuck Rook Cast is, and I don't know who Vario is, and like that's fine. You don't need that. It does show you that adequately, and it doesn't need you to know that in any great detail. You're like, okay, this is a weird little guy gangster. She's a Mandalorian, the lieutenant. And that's all I needed to know about these people.
Yeah, I do want to add one more kind of spoiler-free thing, which isn't, you brought up Andor, which obviously was kind of a high watermark for Star Wars so far in a lot of ways. Although I'd put, Alexander Freed's novels kind of right up there.
Oh yes.
I definitely feel like this is a show that could only come after Andor. Like, it definitely feels like, obviously it's not doing the exact same sort of inquiry or critique as Andor. It's just not the same show as Andor. But I do feel like, maybe this is optimistic, but I feel like in some ways Andor did kind of permanently expand the perimeters of what can you do with Star Wars? What can you do with talking about systems in a Star Wars story, which we will be talking about, I imagine.
Yes, we will.
Great depth.
This is definitely a lot of political stuff to cover with this show, specifically talking about policing and fascism, and droid autonomy, some very Star Wars themes, and child autonomy. So there is real political stuff in here for sure. I would also say that I don't have a handle of how old kids should be before they are cool with certain kinds of violence and death, but I would assume that if your kid is not comfortable watching characters die, they probably wouldn't be able to handle this, because there is death that is clearly death. It's not gruesome or gory, but there's absolutely like, oh, okay, people just died. And then when I began watching the show and there's a character who died, I was like, oh, okay, I guess it's that kind of show. And, Star Wars has not shied away from that in the films, but I think there was a lot of that avoided in some of the animated series before. So
it did feel kind of conspicuously violent in a way a lot of the cartoons haven't. I mean, I guess I'd carve out like the Visions stuff, but those are their own thing. That's an interesting thing you bring up, because Abby and I, my wife Abby, our nieces are all kind of getting to that age where they are interested in Star Wars and Jurassic Park, and that kind of genre, kind of action-y classics. And a number of them got really, really into Star Wars over the past year and a half or 2 years or so. And we've noticed that both of them have this thing where they have been pretty cool with handling everything in 8 out of 9 movies, but something about Revenge of the Sith is too heavy. And I'm not sure if that's because it is maybe more manifestly violent. I haven't tallied that up, or just because it's quite heavy to see this character that they've come to life doing really bad things. Although hopefully they were paying attention to the really bad things he does in Attack of the Clones too. And this isn't a Mando and Grogu episode, but we saw that with our 6-year-old niece. She was, I would say, 60% delighted, 40% bored. But this does definitely seem like it is pitching for a different demographic than Rebels, which, as you mentioned, is a really, really well done children's show, but it was made to be shown to children in a children's time slot. Something I found myself kind of wondering on this rewatch is like, is something lost a little bit in moving away from that demo?
Yeah. And as I hear folks our age talking more about to what extent does Star Wars translate to little kids or not, I just don't think that we're going to be really able to assess or handle that, but I do know that when I was a little kid, I was all about all my parents' Beatles stuff, even though John Lennon was dead, so there's definitely cultural transmission from things before your time. But that it takes a certain kind, here's maybe what I would say. It takes a certain kind of kid to be excited about old things. And maybe that's the distinction.
I think that's fair. I mean, I have never spoken to a 6-year-old who was like, I liked A New Hope less than Rise of Skywalker because it looked less realistic or whatever. I think with genre stuff like that in particular, they aren't really thinking about production values and about that sort of slickness in that way. There's this great bit, and this is kind of tangential in Grant Morrison's memoir, where they talk about how children reading comic books never ask these really sort of pedantic questions like, well, who changes a flat tire on the Batmobile? Because they kind of understand the grammar of fantasy that some of these stories are supposed to be taking place in. I think one of the nice things about Star Wars is that it has capacity for both of those kinds of stories. You can have something like Andor. You can have something like the holiday special.
Yeah.
Which I think is pretty good, all things considered.
Well, before we get into what I think is really the big political question of the series, I do want to take a step back and talk a little about Darth Maul himself, because if you told me, the person who watched Phantom Menace at 18 or 19, I was a massive Star Wars lover as a kid. It was my favorite thing when I was little, but I didn't keep up with the books or anything that came out after. I just didn't even know that was a thing, but was very excited for Phantom Menace. And I watched that movie and I was like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. Jar Jar Binks is so racist. And who the fuck is that black and red guy? What a dumb character concept. This is just like a special effect. There's no there. The fact that Ilana in 2026 is like, I'm so invested in Darth Maul and I'm so excited there's a Darth Maul show, is like, what the fuck? And obviously, yeah, that changes because of the work of Dave Filoni making this character almost whole cloth into something interesting and compelling. But as somebody who doesn't exactly spend a lot of time watching the movies from the 90s, like, am I missing something? Are there some seeds of meaningful character even in the early genesis of this character? Like, what brings us to today?
I was a little younger than you when Phantom Menace came out. I was, I think, 10.
Yep.
And for a 10-year-old, it totally made sense why this guy's face was what was on every can of Coke. He's amazing looking. It's an incredible design. And I think we'll probably want to talk a little bit later about sort of the genesis of that design and some of the iterations it went through. But it is so immediately memorable and kind of cool looking and a little bit mysterious looking. He is really not anything at all in the Phantom Menace. I don't think you were missing anything. He shows up and he rides around on his little Scooty car and he has a really nicely done fight scene and then he dies.
With that, let's dive in full spoilers.
There's really not much more to it than that. And before I sort of came back to the fold and caught up on, the 20 years that I'd missed, I was vaguely aware that he had come back to life with spider legs and kind of considered that as like an indicator of how stupid Star Wars stories were. I do think it is really, as you mentioned, just the product of a creator wanting to shepherd this character into something else. And I think, honestly, Sam Witwer doing like a really, really career-defining voice performance.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that there is a compelling narrative or world-building reason to make this paper dragon from the original movies into a significant lasting character in the series? We had a question sent in from Simon on Blue Sky, and actually I think it makes sense to fit this in here. Sure. We're asked, maybe the most fundamental theme in Star Wars is redemption. Anakin and Ben Solo returning to the light, Ventress, Crosshair, Boba Fett, even Barriss, Offee, all get face turns. But Maul seems almost uniquely irredeemable. Given that, why is he so compelling, and why does he work so well in Star Wars? Yeah, and I will say that for me, part of what makes Darth Maul interesting is that, and certainly in this series, like, I don't feel like Star Wars has ever apologizing for Darth Maul or telling you that anything he did was okay or what he was just, had a poor childhood or whatever. But I do think them showing you the world and context he comes from makes him a much more interesting character. And maybe there's something meaningful in being like, hey, this guy's entire planet was preyed upon and exploited by the space fascists. And, I feel like it's hard. We don't really have as much information as we might have about all of this, but it just feels like he comes from an oppressed group. He comes from an oppressed society, and that shapes the fact that he has very limited choices. But it also never is like, but that's okay. He's an okay guy. He's not an okay guy.
Yeah. I might be talking out my ass here and like half remembering an interview that's not accurate, so take this with a grain of salt. But I think I remember reading that George Lucas really wanted him back.
I saw that too.
Wanted to use him for what was supposed to be a big live action series, Underworld.
Yep.
That was going to kind of ostensibly pair him up with this, in my opinion, not very good character, Darth Talon, who was from some very, very mid-aughts comics. She was like a bodacious Twi'lek babe in that very kind of like witchbladey aesthetic with, like the leather corset and the stockings, who was alive in like this period that was like 30, 40 years after the movies, might have been more than that. And was sort of just like, I like the look of these two characters together. Writer's room, this is your problem to sort out. So, I think there was some recognition that this was a character with potential that wasn't being lived up to, that I think lent itself really well narratively to this kind of through line with the stories of his that work, which is about like, to what extent can you throw a person away? Because obviously he's literally thrown down a chute at the end of The Phantom Menace. I don't know if it was literally a trash chute, but it scans that way.
Yeah.
In the same way that Luke is thrown down, I guess, multiple trash chutes over the years. And that's something that we see a lot with him. I agree with the premise of the question. This is not a character who I think we go looking for a redemption story in, especially because, we know his beginning and we know through Rebels his ending. Everything new that we get is kind of in between stuff. But I think we're invited to have some degree of empathy, if not sympathy. Just seeing someone who is discarded over and over again by people that he tries to find common cause with. And whenever he tries to find someone to kind of forge some kind of meaningful, lasting tether to, they either get rid of him or are taken from him, or kind of recognize in him something that they don't want to recognize in themselves, and leave him for that reason. Which is, not to say that I think Ezra was being an asshole to not stick with Maul. I think that was the right decision on his part. But it is this story about someone who takes these really kind of deranged measures to create community for himself, and never has it work out.
Here's the lore question that I have for you, really, though, is like, because of the rule of two, which for people who don't, please stop me, Holly, if I get this wrong, that when it comes to the Sith, there always has to be a master and apprentice. Darth Maul is required to have an apprentice, but he isn't required to but he could replace them. And I think that Darth's investment in this, what at the time appeared to be one, but now is clearly a series of young people, is not trustworthy, because it is ultimately about his emotional need around what happened to him that was traumatic, and this structural need of the Sith where he has to have an apprentice. And so he is not a trustworthy person to these young people. And in fact, like, there's moments where we actually see him do things that are harmful to Devin to get his own end, right? As I know we've joked about Ezra's worst possible father figure from the wide variety of people who he attempts to get to adopt him in Rebels. I don't know what I can say about him trying to recreate the family that was taken from him and very traumatically taken from him. And what is just like, he is a Sith Lord and he needs number two. And maybe it's both, but I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think this is part of why he's both a really fascinating character and also a character who definitely always sucks. He wants these people to love him, but he also wants to have the option open to betray them and instrumentalize them in a way that he doesn't feel apologetic for, and a way which, frankly, I feel like he barely conceals from them.
Yeah.
Which I think is something that's really interesting with the dynamic that he has with Devin here. He is not pretending to be a better person than he is at any point. I think it's really striking how honest he is about what his intentions are, what his agenda is, what he wants her by his side to do. In a way that I think is both really alarming to watch in some ways, because it is staged as both kind of this like scene of pedagogy and this scene of seduction, but is also really refreshing. I don't think he's someone who is capable of doing the kind of long con that Palpatine did, where he pretended to be this kind of avuncular public figure with the interests of the Republic at heart. Maul is going to tell you what he wants. He is going to tell you what he wants from you, and he is going to tell you that he's going to use you and potentially destroy you to get that. But he still wants you to return that pitch with loyalty and love.
One of the things that's so anxiety producing about this series is that it's pretty clear from the start, especially from the fact that Devin is already mad and is right to be mad, that she's going to end up siding with him, especially also because I am not her, what is his face, her master. I don't like fucking calling characters that. Or I am not Mr. Dinosaur Man's biggest fan. That she's eventually going to end up with Maul. And we also know that by the next time we see Maul, she is not. And so the whole time I'm like, oh no, this poor kid, what is going to become of her?
Yeah. There's actually kind of a big gap between where we see him at the end of the season and where we kind of meaningfully see him next, which is where is he on Rebels now? Look,
I don't remember.
The kind of evil planet that he's on. Where, we see him for like 5 seconds at the end of Solo, but there's a lot of stuff that could happen in between now and then.
But yeah, but whatever it is that happens between now and then, we do know that he's not with Devin. So at some point, either Devin dies or she leaves him, which is, for the best, or he disposes of her. But like something bad is going to happen with her. And that just sort of, to me, just haunts the entire narrative. And, which is not to say that like, and I also think you can see his approach to her, which you're right, is a lot more transparent, is different from how he approaches Ezra, I think, later on. Like he learned from that. She's, I don't know. Devin, though, let's talk about this new Twi'lek Jedi that they have developed for the series. I'm excited. It's another girl and she's not human. That's cool. Thoughts about her?
Frankly, I'm a little tired of Twi'leks. I kind of wished she would have been something that we haven't seen as much of. But Star Wars, especially Star Wars animation, I think really loves its head things. I think it really likes to have a Jedi with stuff hanging off of its head.
It sure does.
Not too surprising. I like her. I think I differ from a lot of people I've spoken to about this show, and that I think the Dino guy, Iko Diodaki, I think he's a very frustrating character narratively, but I think he's also one of the most interesting Jedi characters they've done in a really long time. I think the two of them are both made more interesting by the way they play off of each other. I think on her own, we've seen young Jedi that are adrift and a little alienated and a little angry. What we haven't seen is one of those with a chaperone. So I think her character really benefits from having these kind of two, almost literally the devil and the angel on her shoulder to play off of. But I did like that she's angry. I like that she's pissed off.
Yes. And of course she is. Like, why wouldn't you be, I mean, I do think one of the reasons she's a Twi'lek is because she gets to be an alien and she's still, but have a human face. She isn't grotesque, and shows generally have a hard time having female characters be grotesque. So we're making her a Twi'lek. They're one, oh, look, we have more Twi'leks who aren't hypersexualized. That's good. And then two, oh, she's an alien and she's not gross. I'm like, interesting. Okay. But I am not Dino Man's biggest fan at all. I think he is letting her starve, and abandons her to the police. And every time there's a conflict or risk, he takes the cowardly way out. And there's no reason for his things, but he's doing a really shitty job by her. That's my feeling.
That's what I really like about him. Because he is responding to a crisis in a way that obviously isn't great, but it's something that we see so much of.
Oh, he's a good character. I just think he's an asshole. Let me be clear.
every decision he makes makes sense if you agree with his premise that we as, Star Wars viewers know is incorrect. That this whole Empire thing is an unfortunate misunderstanding that's going to be sorted out in maybe a couple weeks or a month. He is still acting like systems work.
Yeah.
I think in his mind, it's less I am abandoning a child in my care to the police, so much as the police represent law and order. They'll help.
Good God.
I think every relationship, not every relationship, every kind of interaction he has with questions of power, questions of violence throughout this entire show, he is making calls that probably would have been completely uncontroversial if he'd made them, 2 years before the point at which this show starts. We kind of get the impression, and, it's always weird with Star Wars, especially since they've started deciding different species live 200 years or whatever. But, he doesn't seem like a young man. We can assume that he's been around. We can assume that the Republic was a status quo that he was very, very used to. And that the calculations that he makes and the decisions that he makes are under the assumption that things kind of gravitate towards orderliness. And that as a Jedi, it's his job to cultivate and kind of shepherd things towards that point of orderliness. And that as his student, it's his job to help Devin make those kinds of decisions as well. And I don't know if you've read or looked at a lot of the High Republic stuff that wrapped up, I guess, a year or two ago. It's kind of interesting because it's this really, really big publishing initiative that takes place a couple hundred years before the prequels. So, the galaxy is more or less at peace, and the Jedi are embodying basically everything that they think they're embodying by the time we get to the Phantom Menace. And it's really interesting stuff. And he strikes me as someone who would have thrived in that era and is just unable to adapt and is completely unsuited for asking kind of critical questions about kind of the structures of power on this planet as he finds them. And about what his relationship with legality should be when his life has become illegal. And I think that's part of what makes Devin a little bit more complex and a lot more satisfying to me. and that she's not mad because she's rash or immature, which I think would be the really easy direction to take that character. She's in part mad because she's seeing the world more realistically than the person in charge of her safety and education, but doesn't really have um, an apparatus or a structure to call him out. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I don't think there's a lot of space in Jedi education to tell your mentor, you don't know what you're talking about. You're inadequate to this moment.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that one of the big themes in Star Wars is just how this institution of the Jedi is not, is incredibly flawed and,
Mhm.
you know, it parallels a lot of the flaws, the Sith, you know, everything that sucks about the Sith. This is a lot of it's also bad about the Jedi as well.
Mhm.
And this is sort of consistent with all of that. But like, yeah, I just want to be clear. I don't think he's a bad character. I just think he's a shit. It's sort of like, but I understand the idea that like, yeah, like what you're saying is true. That like he's
Mhm.
what he's saying would work in a different place or time.
He's kind of like uh do you remember Master Soul from The Acolyte?
Yeah, yeah.
He's someone he's really, really good at being a Jedi. In ways that make him very, very bad at non-Jedi situations.
So I want to talk about sort of the central theme of the show. And excited that one of our listeners wrote in about that exact thing. Thank you, Dylan, who says, what do you think about the show's depiction of policing? I think the show and the comic as well tend to live in a world where cops are good, which Dylan puts in all caps, because at least they aren't stormtroopers. Ungenerously, I think this is almost an ironic because what Andor is doing with Karn slash Mosk, where we want the quote small business civilian police force to stay free and unencumbered by the big brother military forces. And sort of just like, I mean, the big theme of this, when it turned out that the hero of the series was going to be yet another cop, and that the
Mhm.
conflict of the series was going to be a local cop trying to not have to call in the Empire, I'm like, on the one hand, that's a good, very film noirish thing to do.
Mhm. Mhm.
But like, oh my God, why are you still making cops heroes? What year is this? So anyway, if we want to respond to this question.
Yeah, I think this question is really kind of complicated when it comes to Star Wars in particular, because it is almost like uh, cops all the way down in a way,
Yeah.
where we
Yeah.
have stormtroopers. They are the ultimate bad cops. We have the Jedi, who are often kind of positioned as kind of the good cops
Mm-hmm.
in a lot of maybe some of the more straightforward stories, or some of the more like uncritical stories. Or, honestly, in some of the most critical stories, they're at their most cop like. But, they are literally armed enforcers of law with, in a lot of places, a monopoly on force. Like that's baked into the setting. So I think whenever we do see um, characters that are playing with kind of more recognizable pop culture trappings of like police officers and private investigators and things like that, to me, there's sometimes a little bit of dissonance. Um, like there's that one Edward G. Robinson pastiche guy who shows up every once in
Mm-hmm.
a while in the Clone Wars show, and he just
Yeah.
always feels like someone wanted to do a certain kind of genre pastiche and was really kind of struggling to fit it into this universe. I think it is always interesting to see in this setting, precincts and sergeants and, the cup of coffee and, all the little ticks that you would see in NYPD Blue or The Wire or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. Um, because it is kind of like, well, what is the actual role of these forces in a setting that is both really unlike the real world in some ways, but also seems to already have plenty of other institutions that do a lot of that same work.
I agree with Dylan that the idea that your local cops are going to be better than national level cops as a very specious distinction. It is very true in the world of this TV series, clearly, but it's not true in real life. And, you know, Star Wars isn't going to be a real life, but it is nicer when we can, you know, it's like, oh my gosh, when Saladin Ahmed did his comic series Abbott, which is his own sort of like hard-boiled 70s detective series, he said that his detective is a journalist, not a cop, because he was fucking tired of cops being the protagonists and journalists are actually the ones who do real detection anyway. And it would be cool for Star Wars to explore something like that at some point, because there is only so much you can do and there's only so much you can speak to if everybody's a cop on some level. But what do you think of the decision to have the droid be the character who's constantly defaulting to, we have to follow protocol, and protocol means call the Empire? I think it's interesting to me that it's almost like the programming of the robot is what demands the must defer to authority, must follow the rules, even when the rules are harmful sort of narrative. But is it kind of like blaming somebody else for what you're doing? I don't know. What if you have thoughts about that?
It's weird. It's weird because I think that character is so endearing up to that point. Iowade does a great job with the voice. He has a lot of little charming moments. I think it's really meant to be kind of a gut punch when he calls in the Empire, but it's also not inconsistent. With his attitude up to that point, and
he's been asking the whole time.
It's what he wants, and I don't know if that's because he's a droid or because he is a true believer in policing. I think that's maybe the crunchier way to lean with this, and the more challenging.
Something I read when I was prepping for this episode, because I was like, I don't know anything but the fucking planet this takes place on, is that this planet is one that is dealing with a ton of crime. And I can see how, for a police officer who is already feeling extremely overwhelmed and under-equipped to deal with the crises that he works in, he would be particularly likely to try to call in help because he already feels like he can barely fucking do his job.
I mean, that's kind of part of the problems, but also one of the possibilities of droid characters in Star Wars is that often they are allowed to be essentially really hyper-competent children. Where they are really, really good at the one thing that they're meant to be good at, and then very, very earnest or literal or naive about other things. I think it hurts more that we think that this guy is a good guy. We want to like him. We want to find him adorable. But he is still acting consistently with the kind of fantasy of his vocation that this is what he needs to do, in a way that the kind of human characters around him, even if they are never going to come out and say out loud, I think the Empire is going to destroy our families and friends, they can't say that and they can't act on it, even if it's what they're thinking. And I think all of them, or most of them, are thinking that. We see that incredible moment where Lawson, where he's brought into the interrogation room and he sees those finger marks dragged into the surface of the table. And he knows his former captain is dead, but he cannot say that without also kind of damning himself. Two Boots isn't playing that game because he's incapable of playing that game. He's kind of outside of that deadlock of action, and that kind of ironically frees him to make the worst decision that he could make in the context.
It's just,
go ahead.
It's just so interesting that, you know, Lawson, speaking of a name that says who you are, it's like Lawson, yes, the guy who is following the law, is, you know, it feels like he's violating Two Boots' autonomy when he turns him off. But he was clearly right, because as soon as that motherfucker gets back on again, he immediately calls the Empire and everybody's fucked. And, I appreciate that Lawson shows real contrition for having turned him off. And then it's proven that he was correct, that he had to. I think the childishness, is one piece. I also feel like one of the moments that makes Two Boots realize that shit's fucked up is when they don't let him be himself. When he sees his own autonomy, wearing his boots taken away from him. And I like the note that the show has where everybody can still tell that Two Boots is Two Boots, even without his boots, because of his posture and how he conveys himself physically and his voice. But they do even before they hear his voice.
It's one of those things where, I mentioned that I think Andor permanently, or for the time being, changed, like, what the window of types of stories you can do is. But I also feel like this is maybe an area where it's like, well, not everything can be Andor. Where this kind of interesting kind of like interlocking of systems of oppression, where Two Boots is calling in the Empire, which obviously we don't like, but to forestall that, we also see this kind of pretty aggressive violation of his autonomy. What does it mean to be a droid and a perhaps not entirely informed collaborator? I don't know if that's a question that this particular show is entirely equipped to answer. I think the droid stuff is always kind of this Pandora's box that I want stories to open up. But it's going to be so messy once someone finally does, because then you kind of have to confront the fact that a movie came out 50 years ago about a blonde guy and his two slaves.
Yeah. That's why I think they're never going to do it. I think they're never going to do it in a major way, even though it would be one of the most interesting things they could do.
They keep fainting at it and stuff. And I personally kind of feel like they need to just get that Band-Aid off if it's going to continue to be like a relevant setting to tell stories in. But I don't think I could realistically expect that from Darth Maul Shadow Lord.
Right. Although, what's going to happen is some AI company is going to pay Star Wars to have it feature how AI are people too, and the droids are oppressed just like AI, and that's why we should let AI fully scan our bodies and replace us at our jobs, right? No. Sorry, I'll just come up with the most depressing potential things.
I do kind of want to talk a little bit more about the cop stuff, which is that I feel like they kind of get away with some of this by doing this sleight of hand with kind of genre troping that Star Wars does occasionally, where they really blur the line between kind of hard-boiled stuff and Western stuff.
Yes.
We saw that in kind of a somewhat baffling form in the Cad Bane backstory mini from last year, where we learned the backstory of this space cowboy, and it's that he came from space Chicago, 1930. We kind of see something similar here, where the fashions, the mannerisms, the affectations of these characters around Lawson, even the way that his kind of personal life and his work-life balance is kind of teased at, it's very, very 90s to aughts police procedural.
Yeah.
The kind of police procedural that would be set in like a major metropolitan city. But that fundamental conflict is very, very Western. Can we handle this problem ourselves before we have to call in, the army, before we have to make this a national issue? Which you see in so many Westerns. It's just kind of sneaky because it doesn't look like that. And this city is so kind of cyberpunky and kind of what's the term, ecumenopolis-y, that it kind of is able to bury what the fundamental question of law is. I do want to return to this question of Iko Diodaki here as well, where I feel like his willingness to let the police just kind of schlep off his student is because I think he still sees the Jedi and the local police as kind of cooperating members of different agencies. I think to him, it's kind of like, in the X-Files when Mulder and Scully have to cooperate with the sheriff. Or like a Twin Peaks thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Where, to get back to, I think Saladin Ahmed making a journalist kind of the finder in Abbott is a really smart shout here. Because one of the problems, I think, with sort of propaganda as such is that when we as readers go into a narrative where there's a mystery or an ambiguity, we want to see it resolved. And so we're going to be drawn to characters whose role in the story is to find information and put pieces together and resolve conflicts. And I think there are so many kinds of characters that can do that aren't cops.
Yeah.
And it's just been a really kind of enormously successful and damaging propaganda coup of the past couple hundred years that we do sort of take the cop as the default figure to do that.
Which is so crazy. Like, how often has somebody had something happen to them where they really needed a detective, like something like their purse was stolen or their computer was stolen? And how often have the cops actually helped anybody by doing detective work to solve this problem? It has literally never happened. Like, please write into the show. And this is the shit that I talk to my parents about. I'm like, guys, you're old. You've had shit stolen. Have the cops ever actually helped you? And they're like, and I'm like, no, they have never done any detective work ever. It's wild that the propaganda is so successful that people still think that those are people who solve problems rather than people who cause them.
I think part of it, unfortunately, is that if you're telling a story where a journalist is trying to solve the mystery, let's take Zodiac, for example. If Jake Gyllenhaal finds the Zodiac at the end of that story and shoots him, then that story ends with Jake Gyllenhaal going to jail. Yep. And I think this fictional kind of structure has kind of had this double down effect of also teaching us that it's narratively satisfying that cops can just execute people, which is also bad and, probably beyond the purview of the Darth Maul episode.
Yes.
But it's part of why I think it's so satisfying when a narrative either finds someone outside of that kind of sovereign position of law to do this kind of stuff. I think it's part of why The Name of the Rose is such a satisfying story. But I also think it's why there is this temptation when you are doing a story that is about someone who is unavoidably a capital C cop, you can cut that a little by making them either really just sort of unconventional and idiosyncratic, somebody like your Monk, your Columbo, or making them explicitly a mystic, like, again, Dale Cooper, Mulder, pretty much every Jedi.
Yeah.
Where the onus of what the law that they enforce is kind of gets nudged a little gently into something more metaphysical. I think part of the problem with the Jedi is that, decades of stories, they kind of want to have their cake and eat it too with these characters, where they are mystics, they are priests, they are following nominally a transcendent truth that is apart from and above kind of the actual written law of the Republic. But then they also sometimes just go out and do arrests and are on patrol and have weapons when no one else has weapons. It's kind of a paradox. And I think depending on the story and how good the story is, it's either a really rich and interesting paradox, or it's one that picks the story either really tedious by making the Jedi kind of completely brain dead thugs, or really comes off as kind of unseemly and kind of power worshipping in an uncomfortable way. And I think Iko Diodaki threads that needle nicely, in part because he does not have the power that he thinks he still has. He's kind of Wile E. Coyote a couple sprints out over the edge of the cliff, not yet realizing that there's nothing under his feet. And I think that's an interesting place for a Jedi to be.
There's different times also where there's questions of who is the coalition going to be that's going to fight and win. And, Devin is relatively early saying that she's game to make a coalition with Maul against the Empire. And Geki is like, I will never work on the same side as Maul, even if they have the same aim. And the circumstances really work to take the choice out of his hands. Then he doesn't have that choice anymore. I don't know if you have thoughts about that.
Yeah. I think that's something interesting in this season because it kind of lets both of them be right. I think Iko Diodaki was absolutely correct that him and Devin are ultimately going to be disposable to Maul.
Yep.
And I think he found that out a lot sooner than Devin did. I also think that without having some sort of understanding or partnership with him, they would have gotten even less far than they did in practice.
Yep, definitely. There's just no good choices there. One of the reoccurring themes also is just, Maul calls Devin indoctrinated. And it feels like the question of to what extent are young Jedis indoctrinated is the kind of thing that keeps coming up in fan discourse. And I feel like, to the extent that these people are all being told that you can't have feelings, that's bad. And people make terrible decisions and choices because they can't have sex and have partners. Like, you're like, yeah, that all seems pretty bad. But obviously the Sith is also literally an indoctrination system. That's what adults do to kids, really.
I mean, in practice, in this particular student and teacher relationship, clearly she has no problem disregarding what he tells her when she decides it's not a good idea or it doesn't make sense. So presumably she is not personally under the effects of the Jedi Kool-Aid. I think this is a case where, in part because of Sam Witwer's performance, Darth Maul is kind of seducing the reader or the audience as much as he is the characters, right? What he's saying sounds really good. And it sounds especially good when we are in a situation where the Jedi Order is no more and the Jedi kind of orthodoxy, as embodied by Daki, is clearly not living up to the moment. It's leading them to starving to death and being in prison. I think he has created a situation where there's a lack of incentive to really push back too hard on what he's saying. And all the same, he tells her that pitch and she tries to kill him at least twice.
Yeah, good for her. And he's impressed, and he should be. One of the like we were saying about, oh my gosh, I forgot his name, the name of the voice actor.
Sam Witwer.
So Sam Witwer's performance is so good. And one of the choices here, which I think is something that we see in the other shows, is you see him doing these extremely physically intense activities in fighting, and his voice doesn't sound like he's fighting. And for a lot of characters, that would come off as like bad acting. Like if somebody's getting in a fist fight, you want to hear the voice of the person like, I'm struggling, just trying to get it out. But what makes Darth Maul so terrifying is because he just still has the same dulcet tones. It's like, are you even really struggling here? Are you just that good that you're just like, yeah, I could fucking fight this guy without. And so when you have those moments where he actually does sound like he's exerting effort, you're like, oh, shit's bad. So I think that's an interesting choice. And I love what this show does with, and I feel like I haven't seen this go explored much anywhere, what this show does with Darth Maul as a disabled character. Like, as soon as, and I'll give it to Dino Man, Dino Man is the one who fucks up Darth Maul's robot leg. As soon as his robot legs get some damage to them, and we observe that, oh, right, it makes sense that he can feel that because you need to be able to feel things with your legs so you don't fall over. But I'm just as soon as it already got bad, I was like, oh, I bet he wishes he could turn off the pain sensors while still having the other kinds of sensors that are like pressure, verticality, etc. Like, you really feel that Darth Maul is a character who's experiencing a traumatic disability that has radically changed how his body works in the world. And the show really has gravitas with that in a way that I found respectful and liked. And then they also have the moments of the episode where he just keeps having flashbacks. When he first sees that reflection of his face in the pool of water, and he sees himself young, and he's just like splashes at it. He's like, "Fuck you!" He doesn't say "fuck you." He's like, "I hate you. Go, you whatever." It's essentially a "fuck you, hate you, go away." And then by the end of the episode, when he sees his reflection come back, I mean, the closest I've came to feeling like really like, oh, is he says, "Shh, it's all right. I won't let them do anything to hurt you." You're just like, oh God, like talking about having it out with your inner child. It's very powerful.
Yeah, I think what he says is maybe, and I'm also paraphrasing.
Yeah.
But I think it's a little closer to like, I won't let you do this to anyone else. And it adds so much more to why he's doing this and what his kind of like, this is more than just like doing the permanent merry-go-round of Sith master and apprentice. This is about him hating Palpatine on a really, really personal level. And I liked that this scene, which I think is a really well done kind of like feverish dream sequence. It doesn't let us forget his brother.
Nope.
And it reminds us that he hasn't forgotten his brother. He is a manipulator. He is a murderer. He is a deeply shitty person. But he loved his brother in, I think, a not uncomplicated way, but in a really sincere way. And I think it informs his kind of pitch to Devon. That, yes, he's manipulating her. Yes, I think that if she had said, "Are you manipulating me?" he would have conceded to that. But he also, I think, truly thinks that she is better off not under the thumb of a Jedi. And I truly think that he thinks he's not going to make the same mistakes with an apprentice as Palpatine did, because I think he sees himself as not the same kind of person as Palpatine.
Sidebar about our friend Savage Opress. When I first learned of this character's existence and heard his name, it was through the podcast Blank Check with Griffin and David. And they were doing this episode with guest Peter Serafinowicz, who actually does the voice of Darth Maul in The Phantom Menace. And the host was making jokes that implied that Peter was fully aware of all the character lore of things that happened after the character who he voiced in the movie died. Clearly, of course, the saga with his brother Savage Opress, and it's all being delivered as a joke, and it is very funny on this podcast. And the whole time I'm thinking in my head, like, oh my God, Savage Opress is the dumbest fucking name. I want to scream. And when the character is first introduced, and for those who don't know, his brother is named Savage Opress. When we see his brother introduced in the Clone Wars series, I was again like, this is the most offensive character name. I have turned around on this. By the end of watching those series of episodes of the Clone Wars with him, I realized that they're not calling him that because he is a savage oppressor. He's called that because the oppressors of the Darthamir people see him as a savage and they are oppressing him. And I was just like, oh, I think they were deliberately misleading me with how that name was supposed to work. And I love this reveal. And now I am like the world's biggest fan for the character because that's exactly what's up.
I think it's a name with just a little too much real world baggage. To me, he's Mr. Oppress. Me and him are not on first name terms. But he's a great character. And I think that was Clancy Brown, wasn't it?
Yes, Clancy Brown in the animated series.
Another incredible voice performance. Where, you watch that arc and you're like, I can't believe I'm this moved by Darth Maul's relationship with his Mountain Dew color-coded brother.
Truly, though, like that guy is really like, as much as, you know, Darth Maul, you're like, you have made some bad choices. With Savage, it's like, with Mr. Opress, he had no fucking choices. He was
Yeah.
forcibly mutated. Everything terrible he did is because he had no choice, and it is truly tragic. And which is also like my general feeling whenever I see any of the Night Brothers are this particular type of Darthamir dude in the series. All I could think about is, oh, how sad everything is that has to do with them. And when we see a number of them get killed in the show, every time you're watching these really oppressed group of people be just torn up by this machine, and it just is really sad. And it's, I mean, supposed to be. And I really like that when Devin goes out of her way to say, I'm really sorry that your brothers died. I was like, good kid. But yeah, it affected me too. Because like those guys, they did not have a range of choices presented to them about what to do with their lives.
No, and that's kind of like the irony with Darth Maul, where he has a lot of regrets about being torn away from his home to be kind of brainwashed and conditioned by Palpatine. But at the end of the day, his mother was a witch who sold him to a random old man. He wasn't really going to have like the Richie Rich experience on Dathomir to begin with.
No.
He doesn't have, yeah, I think that's an element of his character where it would be really easy to, if someone told me it was a little bit too much and a little bit hat on a hat, I wouldn't blame them. But he really did not have a lot of avenues open to him from the minute he was born.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of, and sure, why not? What a series for, as you have termed them, weird little guys. I am in love with the evil little robot. I really appreciate how, you know, when I first watched the series, I didn't put the captions on, and I enjoyed the process of trying to interpret his little garbled noises. And when I did my rewatch now with the captions on, I really felt like I enjoyed him more with the captions off, and I really got the gist of what he was saying from his garbled noises before. And this is just one of my favorite evil little robots of all time. And I wanted you to just chime in about the weird little guys of the series, but also just like, how does one make an evil little robot? Is the evil little robot, you know, like our Darth Miri folks, is this a result of childhood trauma? Like, what's going on? What's going on with this?
I actually crowdsourced this because I wasn't sure. And so I asked some people that you and I both know, Jack Rolau of Cerebro fame, or mutual friend Adam. And I got mingled and somewhat confusing answers where we know that canonically there are just robots that were made to be fucked up. There are two evil robots that run around with Dr. Aphra in the comic.
But I think she set them up that way, or no, she didn't set them up that way.
He was built to be kind of like a destructive, kind of violent droid that looks like an astromech for like sabotage purposes. And the evil C-3PO 000, I guess the idea is like his protocol was so kind of twisted that someone invented it and then immediately stowed it away, never to be used. And then it's recovered during the Clone Wars and then lost again, and that's what Aphra's stealing back. Those are examples of robots where someone was like, let's just create a maniac who will cause harm and destruction. And then, you know, there's assassin droids that IG-88 assassinates people because that's what he was built to do. He doesn't seem to have any particular attitude about it. But it also seems that sometimes droids just kind of develop, I mean, we see this with a lot of nicer droids, kind of idiosyncratic personalities on their own. And in general, the longer you go without wiping their memory, the more distinct these kind of personality quirks or tics come through. So, you know, I have to assume that if this was kind of the factory standard setting for what seems otherwise like a very practical kind of droid to have, if you're doing sneaky stuff, I don't think anyone would pay extra to have it just be like a pervert who's giggling all the time. So I kind of have to imagine that this is just kind of how he developed over time. Maybe Darth Maul wasn't taking the time to do the memory reset. Maybe he was just kind of imprinting on all of the carnage that he's observing and witnessing and being implicated in. I think Spybot being the way he is more nurture than nature at the point where we meet him.
I mean, he has been hanging around with these people. I love his mischievousness. He has so much personality. Just what a great little character.
Maul's like affectionate to him in a way that we rarely see. We see him petting this thing, the droid purrs. This is a show where pretty much everyone who is ride or die for Darth Maul in episode 1 is dead.
Yeah.
By the end. And he does not seem as bothered by any of these deaths as much as he is by Spybot. He really seems outraged. Like, he kind of flies into this rage when poor Spybot takes a bath in the acid.
Which is really upsetting. And yes, I'm with you there, Darth.
Because I think Star Wars does tend to have a little bit more mercy for weird little guys.
Yes, talk to our listeners about weird little guys and the significance of weird little guys and some of the wonderful weird little guys of Darth Maul.
What is there to say? They're weird looking and they are little. And they are often guys, but not always. I would say Yaddle is one. I would say Vergere from Legends is one. I would even go so far as to say that Sid Scaleback from The Bad Batch, while neither a guy nor especially little, was one. And I feel like, you brought up the point about why Devin is potentially a Twi'lek earlier, and that it allows her to look recognizably alien, but also have an emotive face. I think the fact that a lot of the alien designs in Star Wars have less emotive faces or less, immediately recognizable faces gives them like this mask-like quality that sometimes insulates them from pathos in the way that, it often plays out. Which means that they're either a little bit disposable or functionally invincible. So let's talk about Ludi Vario. He is this little blue lizard guy that shows up early in the series in a mech, basically. He has this big buff robot body that gets destroyed, and you see that he's this little kind of... he looks sort of like the Yoshis in the 1993 Mario movie. And he kind of has this very kind of like, you're the New Yorker. I would say like a Bronx accent, but maybe that's incorrect.
No, that would be fair.
He talks like a classic kind of Joe Pesci type of character. He's a little cowardly. He's a fast talker. He's always looking to make a deal. And he falls into Maul's orbit. And Maul spends about 30% of his speaking lines throughout the season reminding Varia how easily he could kill him and how much he wants to kill him. And, I fell in love with this character the instant I saw him. Abby fell in love with this character. And we spent all 5 weeks of this show terrified for his safety. And the fact that he gets away, I think, is not super surprising with the way that Star Wars tends to treat this kind of character. It likes to have someone on the stage who is kind of abject or ridiculous or absurd in a way that you aren't really looking at them as having a stake in the way that power is shifting back and forth. So they have this kind of prerogative to say whatever they want to say. They're kind of gesture figures. Yeah. I would say Jar Jar was an example of this being done really badly. This is a series that is not especially rich in this kind of character. It's pretty much Vario and Spybot. And I think that's part of what is kind of effective about Spybot being kind of pretty unceremoniously killed in the middle of a very pitched battle. It's because this is a figure that's not supposed to die at this point in the story. Right.
I'm glad that they gave Vario his like hero moment where he gets to be a distraction and he like accepts that that is probably the best thing he can do to save people's lives, and he goes and he does it. He like gets the step up to bat. I thought was nice. And I was struck on the rewatch by, the first big thing he really says to us is it's exactly the kind of thing where he comes off as completely untrustworthy, but he's actually telling the truth. Like when he says to Lawson, I killed Nicodemus, but it was self-defense and it was a setup. It's true. It was self-defense and it was a setup. And he just because of how he presents himself, he comes off as so shady that obviously nobody believes him. I love that kind of character beat where it's like, you're so sketchy, no one's going to believe you even when you're telling the truth.
And it's just such a good performance. I think that's Chris Diamantopoulos from, where do I know him from? Silicon Valley. There's that great kind of set piece where they infiltrate the Pikes and kill the main Pike guy.
Yes.
Where it plays in such a funny way with like, is he lying or is he lying about lying? Or is he kind of sort of playing along with Maul but looking for an opening to switch sides if he needs to? It's a great feat of animation to sell like his squirreliness. The voice acting is great. He is just, I think, a really, really charming and funny example of this kind of like stock slimeball kind of wheeler dealer.
Yeah.
I rewatched. Well, actually, like months ago, you told me to watch Wonder Man, right?
I did,
and I eventually got around to watching Wonder Man and loved it after being really kind of bored with Marvel stuff over the past couple of years. And after watching Wonder Man, I rewatched Midnight Cowboy.
Yay!
And I feel like Vario kind of has that mixture of kind of insincere and really kind of vulnerable that Dennis Hoffman has in that movie.
Yeah. That's an interesting way to put it.
Kind of like that tweet about, you wouldn't hit me, I'm just a little guy.
Yeah. He's pulling that the whole dynamic, the whole way through. Speaking of other interesting side characters, credit to this show when they I like the note that Lawson actually is being a terrible dad. Lawson's son Riley, like, I can't fucking stand him, but it's not the kid's fault. Like, I just know it's my fault. It's my own, like, because he's sort of like that role of that character who's getting in the way of the other character doing the job and getting the action, even though you know intellectually that, like, this poor kid, he just wants to do normal kid stuff, be sports. His mom's getting her fancy job working for the fascists. His family's dealing with some shit. And his dad is just so transparently had an affair with his underworld connection. And I just have to applaud the show for having been unambiguous in that, in a way that I felt was gratifying, because it would have just been very tiring for them to pretend otherwise. Like, it's oblique enough that if you are some Christian family who doesn't let their kids watch anything interesting, maybe they don't notice that subtext, but like, if you have half of you're like, okay. And it was like nice to, I guess what I'm trying to say with her is it was nice to not be insulted. And she died such a hero and such a badass, like blowing up that spaceship to save everybody's life. The fact that after she blows it up, they are not trailed out of there. Like, it wasn't one of those self-sacrifices where it like barely registers. It's like, no, she bought them an entire night's sleep. Like, that was her. And of course, it sucks that Lawson brought all this shit on her in the first place, and like could have seen that coming as soon as he showed up at her door with those problems. But frankly, they are emotionally invested enough in each other that she would have gotten tied up in it anyway, even if he hadn't shown up like that.
I think she's also kind of like Vario, and that it's not an especially innovative character type, but there's just so much little stuff in the performance that really works. I wound up really liking her. I don't know if you knew this, but I learned while I was kind of brushing up on some stuff before we started talking, that she was played by Pamela Adlon.
Yes.
Who is the mother of Devon's actress.
Yes. And Pamela Adlon, it's interesting to have somebody with that kind of background doing that voice.
I mostly know her as Bobby Hill.
That is also true. So quite the storied performer. But yeah, it was cool to have them together. And I really like that character's design. And, there's always got to be some like shady underworld person who this is somebody's connection. And
I think it's also something nice for, how do I want to put this? Not making Lawson feel like he is unrealistically in tune with where the viewer's sympathies are going to be just because. He has a bias against the Imperials, maybe partially because he's a good guy who doesn't like fascism, but also because his ex-wife is Imperial. He is okay with kind of tiptoeing over the letter of the law, maybe because he kind of understands the game in that way, but also in part because he's sleeping with the underworld contact. It's nice. It's a nice little granular decision. That didn't have to be there, but I'm happy it was.
Yeah, definitely. And I thought all of those chase sequences were so dynamic and well done. I mean, Star Wars animation is some of the most high quality fight sequences in animation. But like just really good breathless editing, chase scenes, pursuit, and all of that stuff.
Yeah. I feel like they were doing something new with the lightsabers in this show. They had, I don't know how to describe this, but they had this really cool, like, swooshy effect to them. It kind of felt like they were trailing behind themselves a little more than they usually do.
I didn't really compare it, but I do think they looked beautiful.
Yeah.
I also was impressed with how well the show animated things that took place in dark. Like I could still see what was happening. But one other piece of continuity between this series and Rebels that I noticed is, there's this moment where Lawson says to his kid, like, look, kid, not kid, that's his son. Look, Riley, the Empire is not who you think it is. And I keep thinking like, yeah, I get that his mom works for the Empire, but he probably needed to have that conversation with Riley a lot sooner. It reminded me of how in Rebels, Ezra's parents, we learn, have both been captured, taken away by the Empire because they were doing illegal broadcasts of anti-imperial news services. Very, very brave. And Ezra didn't seem to, maybe I'm misremembering, but it seemed like Ezra didn't know that's why they'd been taken away and didn't understand that what they had done was a political sacrifice for the greater good. And I think he would have had less anger with his parents had he understood that what they did was a noble sacrifice. I mean, yes, he was abandoned, but also like literally like to try to do one of the most important things anybody could do. And it feels like this moments where these parents have these insights into the Empire and they think they're protecting their kid by not telling them. But in each of these cases, it's like, no, you would have been better off telling your kid.
Well, actually, that's an interesting point. Did you get a clear sense of when this took place?
This series?
Yeah, like how soon is this after?
It's, early enough that Darth Maul doesn't know who the fuck Darth Vader was. And that to me was like, so I knew Darth Vader was coming. I knew when he was coming. I mean, I should have put him, we got to shepherd Darth Vader. But when Darth Maul says to Darth Vader, who are you? That gave me pause because I was like, oh, this is really early. Yeah.
We sort of talked about this with, I always have to check if he's Eco Diodaki or Eco Diodaki. I have to wonder how many people on a planet like this that I got the impression was kind of like far enough out on the periphery that the Empire, if they hadn't been called, they weren't necessarily going to show up for a while. I have to wonder how many people on that planet are thinking, like, we can just kind of put our heads down through, wait this out, things calm down, or people elect a new, chancellor, and we stop doing the silly emperor thing, and life will go back to normal. I imagine there were tons of parents at this moment in the setting who kind of knew they had to have this conversation with their kids, but kept rationalizing, now's not the time.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe if I'm patient, it won't be necessary.
Mm-hmm. It's
I think
something I
just
hear. Yeah.
the fact that Riley has this little line about how he wants to go visit his mom on Coruscant.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see that Lawson thinks this is a bad idea, but can't really muster a more articulate reason for that other than let's wait until we can both go. Which is kind of insane. Like,
Mm-hmm.
if you have your weekend with your mom, her ex-husband doesn't necessarily get to tag along.
But yeah, I think that what we should take from this is parents, talk to your kids about fascism.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important, and there are good guides and information on the internet to help you have those conversations and talk with your kids about fascism before it's too late.
Mm-hmm.
So the show went there. I mean, 'cause, like, Riley's not even that young. I'm like, talk to your kid about fascism. Yeah. Oh, I didn't even think, speaking of them not being that young, I would like to pat the show on the back for not trying to force some sort of romantic bullshit between the two teenagers. Thank you, Star Wars.
That was refreshing.
Yeah. And I guess Star Wars is often good about that. So maybe that's why I didn't really think about it till now. But yeah.
Especially with Jedi characters, I feel like there's a hesitation to go there one way or the other. I think we saw that with Ahsoka too.
Well, speaking of Darth Vader, what did you think about how the show deployed and handled Darth Vader?
I think, honestly, the other two Inquisitors in this show do nothing for me.
Mm-hmm.
They're both characters who've been in other stuff, and largely in other stuff where they say nothing and die.
Mm-hmm.
And, they were fodder for some great fight scenes, but I think pretty rote as characters. Ditto the Imperial. Blake, one of a series of recent Imperial guys who kind of make the most out of being interchangeable with one another, which, I get. That's kind of the point.
Yeah, I liked that. He has no glamour at all, and he deserves none.
I do think that until the moment Vader shows up, there is a little bit of an interest gap with antagonists in this, which is kind of a misleading or stupid thing to say, because obviously, like, Darth Maul is filling that gap. He's kind of in this hybrid space where he's our hero throughout this, while he's also kind of like this antagonistic force at the center of everything else. And I think it's wise in the first chunk of the series to not have someone really flamboyant or magnetic kind of pulling the spotlight from him.
Yeah.
But I do kind of wish that there was just someone I gave a little bit more of a shit about filling some of those roles before Vader showed up. That being said, it's effective when he does show up. I feel like in recent years, they've kind of doubled down on this idea that when you use Vader, make him a horror villain.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was done really well here.
What I loved about it is they're going into the jungle and they hear these noises, and you think there's going to be like, it actually really reminded me of the King Kong movies. And when you hear when you hear Rook get grabbed and scream as she gets dragged away, like, you're half expecting it to be like a tentacle monster or a giant, like, actual dinosaur or a King Kong, but like a monster that doesn't speak, a monster of the animal kingdom. You expect that to go extend and grab their leg, like get eaten by a rancor or the pit thing whose name I'm forgetting. And instead of it being a rancor, there's a couple of moments of silence, and then it's Darth Vader. And I was like, oh, that's so beautiful, because it's presenting him not just as a horror villain, but as an animal who's like beyond reason and beyond sense. And, we have these two very hat-on-a-hat Inquisitors with their two-sided spinning lightsabers, that all the new modern all the contemporary Sith scary guys seem to get. And Darth Vader, he's only got one saber, but man, he is a relentless turbo force. He only needs one lightsaber. And he has a very different way of fighting. He's just like a battering ram. And I thought all of that was conveyed so well. And he was so scary, and just the breath, beautiful. And just the reveal from Maul, who the fuck are you? Beautiful.
Yeah. I'm curious how they used him in season 2, because I think it would be really easy to overuse him.
I wonder if it's going to become a beat where like he only shows up in like late season, then you just have like this moment of where he gets deployed, and it's like, okay, here's Vader getting deployed, sort of. But
yeah, I feel like the best Vader stuff in kind of like the Disney years is stuff where he's barely a character, right? Well, that's not true, because the comics are really good.
Oh my god,
but
so
you know,
good. But that's different
stuff where he's like visual stuff, where he's basically he's a hurricane warning. He shows up and you know you're not going to win. Rogue One, Jedi Survivor. I actually didn't really like how he was used in Obi-Wan Kenobi. But,
didn't see it, so I can't say.
I didn't like much of anything in Obi-Wan Kenobi. This, I think, almost flirted with having too much of him in it. But I do think he fought in such a kind of heavy way. Especially there's this shot where he is like, he's kind of bringing his saber down like it's a sledgehammer almost. And it has this sense of weight that I didn't really think you could convey with these sort of weapons. And it's really kind of impressive to me in that it doesn't feel inconsistent with the way that he's fighting in A New Hope, which is obviously kind of, it's a movie where they don't have the grammar of wuxia to steal from.
Yeah.
So they're kind of slowly fencing with each other, sort of. It's not acrobatic.
Yeah.
I love that they were able to keep that and still make it really terrifying to imagine fighting someone like that, and also plausible that he was going to be able to beat this entire cohort of other people. My wife is really the person in our relationship that's usually paying closer attention during fight scenes, and kind of tracking the choreography and all that. And she said she was really impressed with the way that like he seems completely present in every fight he's in, but is also kind of just like ambiently using the force to like stop rubble from hitting him, or redirecting pieces of debris on the ground towards other people. That it really sells, you know, that he was the chosen one, that he was for his entire youth considered absolutely like king hot shit of everything. That none of that power had really gone away. And I think it's an interesting juxtaposition, because you mentioned how attentive this show is to Darth Maul as a person with a disability. Everything about Darth Maul as a disabled person is obviously also true of Darth Vader, and more so.
Yeah.
But you almost see him kind of choosing to be a machine in these situations.
Yeah. I mean, I you know, it feels like the kind of fighting that we even see Darth do is around the fact that he probably has more robot body going on than Maul does. Maybe I'm not remembering. I will fully admit to my listeners, only watched the 90s movies, one each. And one of those was only the Riff Tracks version. So feel free to boo me now. But yeah, I think that like in some ways, Darth Vader feels more removed to me almost, even though he has a more human, because he's like literally been a human, like been more of a human experience where, I don't know, then maybe that's just my perspective with my own relationship with disability. Is there anything you want to hit that we have not hit yet?
Looking at the notes, did you want to talk about Rick's cast? I think there's really not that much to say.
Okay, I wasn't sure if there was. If there isn't, then let's not. Because I was like, I don't know, anything. Okay. If there isn't,
I mean, I think
yeah.
I honestly, I think if we wanted to talk about her, it would be in the context of something that I don't think totally worked. She's a weird character. She showed up in a comic book miniseries before they knew they were going to get a season 7 of the Clone Wars. And so there was like this flurry of stuff that was to kind of adapt important stories that they were going to do arcs of in the show. So like the novel where Asajj Ventress dies, or, quote unquote dies, was originally going to be an arc. And there was this mini series that Dark Force put out that kind of just got grandfathered into being canon about kind of, okay, well, where's what's her name? Mother Talzin.
Mm-hmm.
What happened to her? How does Maul go from being where he is at the end of season 6 of the Clone Wars to where he is in Rebels? And they introduce Rook as kind of just one of the Mandalorians that's loyal to him. And honestly, it's a really not very good comic. I wouldn't urge anyone to seek it out. Everybody in it is kind of generic. Really does feel like just kind of hitting bullet points on an outline to be like, okay, Talzin's dead, Darth Maul's here, he has these guys. So then when they do season 7, they incorporate Rook cast into some of the Mandalorian scenes just to provide some setup for why this woman is with him in the comic. I think she's a potentially interesting character in this show, and I think that if she had survived, I would have been interested to see what they do with her in season 2. But as it is, I think there's something that's potentially really kind of frustrating to me, but also potentially sort of interesting about how this show gives Darth Maul this kind of pretty robust little coterie of guys, and then leaves him without most of them by the end of the season.
Yeah, they all get their asses killed.
His two little orange guys both get killed. The other Mandalorians decide to, hit the bricks and then immediately get exploded. And Rook cast is, Vadered. I had questions throughout most of the season about why exactly she was so unswerving in her loyalty to this guy, who at times you kind of get the impression that she's asking herself, like, is it in my best interest to be with this, ostensible leader who is making decisions I don't agree with based on his fanatical devotion to a religion that I am not part of and that he will not explain to me. There
and
are
it's costing her power. Like, she has her Mandalorian followers are making it very clear they are not going to keep going forever.
And there's so many moments where she's like, why the fuck did we do this? Why do we have this child hanging out in a pantry in our sewer lair? And his answer is never much more than, I'm following the path, or, I'm following the plan. He's not giving her satisfying answers. And, I've never been a henchman as such. I've been an adjunct, which is kind of like that, but not.
I love that.
Not quite.
The pay is worse, and I'm trying to think of something else to say about how terrible it is to adjunct. The pay is worse, and there's fewer opportunities to develop a permanent leadership role in your institution as an adjunct than there would be as a henchman, based on my understandings of this very exploitative employment system in the academia right now.
Yeah, and if Darth Maul decides to kill you, he can, and your dean's not going to have your back. I had questions about what she wanted. I had questions about what her belief system is. Because we can assume that she's pretty ride or die for the Mandalorians, and that her reasoning is, well, Darth Maul took us over fair and square. He has, presumably, I guess he doesn't have the Darksaber at that point. I just wasn't sure why she was sticking with him beyond where else would she go at this point? Because she doesn't seem like a stupid person. Um, she seems pretty shrewd, and she seems like she has a pretty good instinct for where the wind is blowing and when the other Mandalorians are getting frustrated.
Mm-hmm.
But she does stick around until the end. And I feel like there was something there to explore that just didn't get explored.
I liked how for the first time the Pike's character design didn't make me want to punch something. I think the Pikes look disgusting and ugly and not like in a good and interesting way in every other show. And in here the Pikes are like gross and no, they're interesting visually and they're still gross and they still look like the Pikes always have, but they actually like look like an intentional design and they're scary. So
full disclosure, I love how the Pikes look all the time.
Well, there's
I
just
don't know
still
what it
accounting for some people's taste.
I think they are one of my favorite looking Star Wars aliens. I don't like that. Depending on whether it's a cartoon or live action, they seem like they're two completely different kinds of thing.
Mm.
But I like them when they're catfish guys. I like them when they're weird giraffes with masks. I like that they are. I like that they are distinct. I like that they are a faction where you can just have a character wreak some havoc on them and there's no consequences for it because they're so vaguely defined.
I'm looking at images of them from like the live action Who's He What's This, and I think that the character design, as you said, the catfish guys thing is fine, but just how they looked in the Clone Wars, I just thought was so fucking heinous, and that's really what I'm responding to. With their faces being just too fucking tiny and their heads looking like some kind of a macrophage and wanting to pop it. It's just, ugh. But I like the design for this show. I really do.
A couple Valentine's days ago, Abby asked me to do her a zine of characters she liked doing skateboarding tricks and bike tricks.
That's so cute.
And I wound up doing like 14 pages of just Pikes skateboarding.
Aww.
And it was delightful.
That's cute. That's very cute.
I do think that this I'm just gonna Google what they looked like in Shadow Alert, because I do remember thinking that it looked like they were really trying to find a good middle ground between the two different versions of them.
Mm.
I just think they're neat.
So two more things I wanted to hit up is, we're constantly having it revealed to us that there are additional Jedi survivors of Order 66. My inclination is to say that this makes sense because the galaxy is fucking huge. But I could see somebody arguing that it makes Luke or then Kanan or whatever less special if we keep finding more of these random ass kids. What do you think?
I think, it's an idea that you can't really put back in the bottle. And I think wisely, the franchise has kind of decided to embrace this idea that there are enough of them for there to be an organized kind of apparatus to sort of smuggle them to safety, which we see in a couple things. We see Asajj working with it in Tales of the Whatever. Mm-hmm. We see it in, the Obi-Wan show, which I think is one of the handful of things in that show that worked. They've come out and said, yes, plenty of people survived, enough so that we aren't going to name them or attempt to put a number on them. They're avoiding, to talk X-Men Insider Baseball for a second. They're avoiding the issue that the X-Men comics ran into about 20 years ago, where they said, all right, there's 198 mutants and that's all there is. And then having to scramble and come up with some rationale when someone wanted to use a 199th that wasn't on that list. Mm-hmm. They've left it open, and it makes sense. There are a lot of planets. It's outer space. It's an entire galaxy. People are on different planets. People are meditating out in the wilderness. I think it would be sillier if they did immediately scoop up everybody.
Yeah.
And I think with few exceptions, everyone that we've met that survived had a pretty good reason for kind of slipping through those cracks.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the interesting things about Eco Diodaki is that for the most part, when we really spend time with a Jedi survivor, they tend to be people who were Padawans or younger, who didn't really have a full kind of mature life in the Jedi Order, that they kind of had to mourn. So I think it was interesting to spend time with someone who was older,
Mm.
and who was, as we've discussed, not doing as good of a job to adapting to kind of the new order of things. So yeah, I don't think there's too many survivors.
Cool. With the last listener question was Jessica Jessica Ritchie shared with us some examples of Star Wars early Episode 1 concept art, in which Darth Maul was originally supposed to be female, and they had this really cool artistic design we'll link to in the show notes for what the costume could look like. And I think we were saying how it kind of looks like some of that design ended up being used for the Night Sisters later.
Yeah, I mean, number 2 here looks a lot like Mother Talzin,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm curious if number 1 kind of informed like Asajj back when she was bald.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
But I think that is interesting because we talked a little bit earlier about what a journey this character has had from pretty um, boring beginnings in the Phantom Menace. He's very butch in the Phantom Menace.
Oh, of course. How could he not be? They don't have another aesthetic they feel comfortable using in that visual world.
Yeah. Whereas I think Sam Witwer brings something really kind of slinky and a little bit sultry to his performance. I think has made the character a lot more popular. And I mean, maybe I'm in a bubble. I mostly talk about Star Wars with other queer people,
Mm-hmm.
but I would feel comfortable calling Darth Maul a camp classic. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
there's something there that's immensely appealing. He's very theatrical. He's very kind of sinuous. He has this kind of androgyny to him.
I'm actually curious if they began slimming him down and portraying his physicality differently over the course of the character's animated existence, and if predating, and I would think maybe possibly predating the voice actor casting, just because of the way the production would work. But it depends, I guess, at what point this began to develop. I don't really know. But it's true. I do look at the face of the character as it looks in this series and see it as being very different from what we had in the movie, and more interesting here. And yeah, he's vampy. He has a lot of vampiness to him.
And like obviously we haven't really been talking about it that much because Obi-Wan Kenobi's not in this show, but his whole dynamic with Kenobi is so erotic. It's so charged.
Can you help me out here? Because I think this is something that I maybe didn't quite grasp, which is also uncharacteristic of me, I think, normally. Mm-hmm. So help me out about the eroticism of being cut in half with somebody's sword, please. Yes. Like, I know what you just, and for listeners who have no idea what the fuck we're talking about, I assure you there are many people who express this opinion, and I have not asked any of them to explain it to me. But Holly, if you have the forbearance, speaking as a queer person myself, I'm afraid to say that I'm going to need you to explain it to me like I'm a straight guy. What's with the whole Obi-Wan Kenobi, Darth Maul thing that the internet seems to be trying to sell me on?
Sure. Well, okay. So first of all, The Phantom Menace itself, George Lucas is not a sexy director. Mm-hmm. I have never seen him without his flannel shirt tucked into his big jeans. Like he's not Greg Araki. But even in The Phantom Menace, like what happens at the end, Obi-Wan Kenobi penetrates him and literally gives him the little death. Then when he comes back in the cartoon with this kind of bravura vocal performance, all he wants to do is settle this, grudge or infatuation with Kenobi. It's it's the way of things in a boys' cartoon.
Hmm.
He talks about wanting to fight him, wanting to defeat him, but again and again, what he wants is to be next to him. He wants to be struggling and sweating alongside of him, and kind of, you know, locking blades with him. In Rebels, we talked about redemption earlier. I think that's as close as it gets to him. He dies
Mm-hmm.
cradled in Obi-Wan Kenobi's arms, basically talking about, is our kid going to be okay?
That was the first time I was like, oh, okay. But to me, it honestly was sort of like, well, that came from I don't know where. This is helpful because the Darth Maul as portrayed in the animated series is very vampy and is also campy. But that's not necessarily interchangeable with me seeing him being depicted in a heightened or charged way with relation to those kinds of fights necessarily is I guess
I think part of it is
yeah.
I think part of it is the role that Asajj plays for both of those characters as well. So it's very Edith Sedgwicky to me. Where Darth Maul manifestly sees her as a rival for power in kind of like this very limited Sith, and as an object of envy later, as someone who manages to get out of this Sith kind of codependency. Obi-Wan Kenobi very kind of manifestly is flirting with Asajj. That's someone where from the very beginning their fights are kind of coded in this very kind of seductive, kind of back and forthy way, which you can get away with more easily in a cartoon if it's a straight couple.
Yeah.
And then every time the three of them are on screen together, notably that really nicely done fight scene when Darth Maul first comes back up, it feels like both of them just want Asajj to get out of the way so they can be, roughhousing among the crates together.
Well, I just say, if anybody ever cuts me in half with a laser sword, I may be queer, but they will not have done so queerly, and my vengeance that I will seek upon them will not be particularly erotically charged. That be a warning to you.
I know myself well enough that I do not have the depths of spite that Darth Maul has. I think if someone cuts me in half, I'm just going to give up and die. I don't have the wherewithal to survive on the trash planet for however many years.
Oh no, I have faith in you, Holly. I fully believe that we will be persevering with our with our terrifying insectoid lower halves of our bodies in the trash planet, slowly losing our minds as we eat presumably garbage and refuse, but that our inner core will be reconstitutable when our intern shows up. And then we can kind of get our heads back on straight a little bit and get down to some serious vengeance.
I think one bottom surgery was enough for me.
Ba-dum-bum.
No.
Thank you for going there with me, Holly. I appreciated that.
It's okay.
I've been afraid to ask, and I feel enlightened now. So thank you for that. Well, I think that's all we have for the show. Tell our listeners where is the best place for them to keep up with your works, including could people request and receive your Darth Maul zine, wherein he's featured as Saint Sebastian on the cover, which is amazing.
I'm actually working on getting that set up. If you happen to live in Vermont, those will be carried in a couple bookstores up here pretty soon.
Yay.
If you want to order a copy of Heaven's Wish to Destroy All Minds, you can find a link to do that on hollyraymond.card.co. It's card with 2 R's. You can also find a link to We Want It All to order that, or a free PDF of Maul is Lost because that chapbook is out of print. My goal is to have more copies of Darth Maul is Lost and Cuckoo Island available for people to buy by the end of the summer. Certainly in advance of FlameCon this August.
Yay.
And you can also find links to my Shelf Dust essays, my Comics XF essays, and a slightly out-of-date index of podcast appearances. I am very proudly not really on social media anymore, so...
Well, I'm on Blue Sky a little bit too much. My handle is LEVIN. To be clear, I only say that a little bit too much in terms of the amount of time. I thoroughly enjoy the social media platform, and I wouldn't be spending as much time on it if I didn't enjoy it. Listeners, if you want this podcast to keep going, I need you to help me spread the word. Tell a friend. Looking forward to having some more coverage this summer. For example, covering my Adventures of Superman animated series. Would love to do that. And we're finally going to get to cover The People's Joker with a very special guest. So Graphic Policy really appreciates you. And as we like to say, keep it geeky.